Sir Stirling Moss died at his London home at the age of 90 on Sunday. Although his racing career was cut short and ended without a Formula One title, it was still among the most impressive in motorsport. Sir Stirling Moss was often labelled as the greatest F1 driver never to win a world championship, but given his 212 victories from 529 races across all disciplines, that title somewhat undersells his talent behind the wheel. Among those 212 race wins, his 1955 victory at the Mille Miglia, a torturous road race over 1,000 miles of Italian roads, is in the running as the most impressive drive in motorsport history and underlines his claim to a more representative title as the greatest all-round driver of all time. Yet Moss's legacy is not limited to the racetrack. Known as Mr. Motor Racing, he was also one of the sport's earliest celebrities and was among the first drivers to recognize his own commercial worth. He skillfully and successfully exploited that to the full, negotiating sponsorship deals firmly and selling himself dearly. But his racing career came to an early end with a brutal accident at a non-championship race at Goodwood over the Easter weekend of 1962, forcing him into a new life as a public figure. Bernard Caillé, Getty Images. I had to start working for a living at 32 with no knowledge of anything, he told ESPN in an interview 50 years later. It was a bit of shock, I can tell you. However, if anything, Moss became more famous and marketable as a commentator, author and celebrity after his accident. Up until he retired from public life in January 2018, he remained a reference point for his sport and an eloquent first-hand source for motor racing's remarkable past. Moss's racing career started in local hill climb events before he entered his first professional race in 1948 at just 18 years old. Successes in Formula 3 secured him a drive for HWM's Formula 2 team, and within 2 years he was racing alongside the biggest names in the sport in both F1 races and sports car events. His early years in Formula 1 were unsuccessful, largely because he was in British cars at a time the Italian marques were dominant. Moss had been approached by Ferrari in 1951 and offered a drive assess his talent, but after making the journey to Bari with his father in an overnight sleeper train, he was stood up by the Italian team, which had given his car to Piero Taruffi. That really pissed me off, Moss told ESPN in 2010. Taruffi was a nice guy and a good driver, but Enzo Ferrari had simply changed his mind without telling me. At that point I vowed to myself that I would never race for him and I never did. In 1954 Moss entered the F1 Championship in a Maserati, and a third-place finish at Spa on his first outing in the new car persuaded German motoring giant Mercedes to offer him a full-time drive in 1955. In 1954, Mercedes had returned to motorsport for the first time since the war and with Juan Manuel Fangio as its lead driver, it was building a team to dominate Formula One. Stirling Moss was teammates with Juan Manuel Fangio at Mercedes in the mid-1950s. Bernard Caillé, Getty Images. The relationship between Fangio and Moss blossomed from the off, taking on a master and apprentice dynamic. Moss's role was to support Fangio and he finished the season second in the championship as the Argentine secured the third of his 5 titles. He took his first Formula One victory along the way at the British Grand Prix at Aintree, but was never certain if Fangio had gifted him the victory as a friendly gesture. Meanwhile, Moss was also making a name for himself in sports car events. The most grueling of all motor races at the time was the Mille Miglia, and Mercedes entered Moss in a 300 SLR with his friend and motor racing journalist Dennis Jenkinson as his co-driver. After a series of reconnaissance laps before the event, Jenkinson and Moss graded the corners on the 1,000-mile course as saucy ones, dodgy ones and very dangerous ones depending on road surface and severity. Jenkinson wrote the notes down on an 18-foot-long piece of paper, the toilet roll, and coiled it within a specially designed alloy box with a perspex viewing window. This became the pair's secret weapon, allowing Jenkinson to convert the notes into a series of hand signals so that Moss knew what was coming next. Moss's blistering pace, combined with blisteringly hot weather that year, meant the Mercedes was storming through the checkpoints at record pace. By the halfway point at Rome he was 2 minutes clear of Taruffi's Ferrari and by the time they reached Florence the Ferrari had dropped out with an oil pump failure. By that point, Mercedes dominated the top 3, with Hans Hermann in second and Fangio, suffering from a fuel injection problem, in third. A punctured fuel tank accounted for Herman's retirement as he traversed the Fuda Pass, and that left Moss with a 30-minute advantage over Fangio. Stirling Moss and Co.,